I went on a camping trip with my parents, grandparents, and a friend in North Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains when I was maybe 16 sometime in the fall. It was a simple trip where we all made good campfire food and went shopping at small shops in nearby town to get trinkets and to go to those crappy little gem mines where you can buy some geocodes and break them open and polish them to find quartz and amethyst. One night, after we had already made s'mores, went over to my grandparents' camper to play board games. I and my friend had settled down in our bunk beds in our parents' camper to start going to sleep. It was about 1 in the morning and everyone else in the camper had dozed off, but I had stayed up on my phone playing a video game and texting my significant other. Just then I'd heard something rustling outside in the brush near our camper. I played it off since we were in a national park and it was normal for squirrels and raccoons to be messing around. Maybe 5 minutes later, I heard something outside the camper banging the metal ring around the fire pit. I decided to go check out what it was and get my slides from outside in case it was a raccoon, and took them. What I saw when I peeked out of the camper's door was what I thought was a deer bumping its snout up against the grill grate of the fire. I thought it was strange behavior, but I figured it had some disease and decided to leave it be. I opened the door a little bit more and crouched down to get my slides from the ground just because I had gotten up. But it had noticed me then. This deer was looking straight at me, huffing as if it were trying to scare me off. I grabbed my shoes and was getting ready to close the door back. But then it stood on his hind legs and its knees locked. It looked like they were bending backwards, if that makes any sense. It was almost like they were locking in place. I almost peed myself right there. I quickly shut the door and locked it. And I got back in my bed and sat there, my adrenaline rushing, trying to comprehend what I had just seen. The next morning, I looked up any similar sightings and only got cases of zombie deer virus. But none of the behavioral effects of the disease included standing on their hind legs. About 4 months later, while listening to the Swamp Cooler channel, I heard a story from North Carolina that shared a story about them going to the Appalachian Mountains and seeing the exact same thing. Only their encounter bared a mount of sharp teeth. They said it was a local legend that most people just called the not deer a year pass, and I can't say that I thought much of it. But as a pagan, I believe the more you speak or think of something, the more likely it is you'll manifest into your life, or in this case, encounter it. So fast forward about a month ago. I was 18 and in college, but I was home on winter break and chilling and smoking with some friends. We had decided to tell scary stories that we had all had from personal experiences, because we were all bored out of our minds when it got to me. I told the story from a few moments ago, and everyone went silent, as we're all spiritualist and superstitious. After telling that story, I kept thinking about it throughout the night. Once had gotten time for me to go home before my mom yelled at me for being out too late. I had gotten on the road and drove home. I kept thinking about it over and over the whole 40-minute drive. And once I'd gotten a few turns from my house, I saw deer run out in front of me. So I stopped the car to wait for them to pass. One of the deer running, I stopped at the side of the road and looked straight at me and stood up with the same backwards knees that locked in place. And I stepped on the pedal and got to my house within 3 minutes when it normally should have taken about 8. I'd went to sleep that night and started having nightmares about it, waking up in cold sweats multiple times throughout the night. These nightmares continued for weeks, and it wasn't settling well with me. One day after what are dubbed my last nightmare, we let our cats out of the house to have some outdoor time. Later that day at 5 or so we called them and all of them came back, but one, so my mom asked me to go look for him in the woods. I live in a very rural small town in South Carolina, and I live pretty far out in the more rural area with my parents. You don't really see many people out here unless they're hunting. So I didn't expect much by walking out a mile into the woods to look for my cat. As I was calling his name, I heard a rustle in the brush a few yards away from me. It instinctively turned to look, and there was a deer bearing a mouth of sharp teeth. I screamed and turned running back to my house. Once I was out of the woodline, I lay down to catch my breath and simply just started crying. I started spouting nonsense, saying that I was sorry for looking at it and thinking about it, and that I did not mean to call it here. I did not know if it was anywhere nearby, but it felt like right now. It was everywhere. I haven't seen my cat again since then. So I just suspect that some coyotes got him or worse. Maybe that thing got him. I don't think about it much now, and I haven't since, but I still have occasional nightmares about it. I hope not to see this thing ever again. So the only thing I have to ask is, what is that thing supposed to be? My name is Sam and I live in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. I have lived here all my life and I've been hunting in these mountains since I was a boy with my father. I am also a heavy believer in the supernatural, and encrypted dog men, Bigfoot skinwalkers, and windows have gotten me intrigued by the superstitious, but we're here in Arkansas. We have a legend, and I'm sure you have heard a legend here. And let me tell you that this legend is very real. This is my encounter with the infamous Ozark Killer. It was a cold, misty night in the mountains of the Ozark landscape. My father and I were gathering some firewood for the family. We live in a cabin that we built ourselves, and my dad being brought up in these mountains by my grandmother and his great-grandfather. Our family consisted of my stepmother and my two younger siblings. I was the oldest of my two siblings. I'm currently 21 and own a couple of firearms. We hunt with an 1870 antique Winchester repeater and a Krag Jorgensen rifle, or more known as the bolt-action rifle, that was passed down by my grandfather, and was used to hunt game back when trapping was a big thing in the States. Now we use these weapons as a token of our appreciation to our ancestors. I also use a standard hunting knife and a crossbow. Whenever I go camping and hunting. We go hunting often, and we have not seen much this past winter. We would see the occasional bear or the occasional mountain lion, but not many deer this season, which was odd as they are abundant in these mountains. While we were gathering some firewood outside, we heard a howl in a distance. I have heard these owls before, and mostly I assumed it to be some coyotes, a fox, or maybe a lone cougar. It was so much colder than any normal night, and we were chopping the firewood. My father was looking at me with sweat dripping down his face. He said, "How's it going over there, champ?" I responded with, "Just find out. It's a lot colder than normal tonight. What do you say we go hunting for the game center? The kids are probably hungry." He responded with a resounding, "Yeah, I think we should. We don't want to keep the family waiting." So we went inside the cabin to gather our weapons. I took my Winchester repeater and my crossbow, and my father took his Krag Jorgensen rifle and his pump-action shotgun. We let my mom know we were going to go hunting and that we would set off into the cold. We decided to take a trail that was all too familiar to us to see if we could catch ourselves a big buck or a doe, which would be lucky for us. I was walking through the snow, listening closely to anything that could be lurking in these woods. Luckily, it was a clear night and the moon was full, so I could see ahead of me fairly well. In these mountains, we had all sorts of encounters ranging from bison to cougars. But this time, it felt different. The woods were eerily quiet. I felt like something was watching me from the tree line. All I could hear was the beating of my heartbeat and the sounds of our footsteps in the snow. And then we heard it aloud. Very eerie, how that made my blood go cold. I tried to focus on where the sound came from. I looked at my father, and he seemed to be on edge. I asked him, "What do you think that was?" He responded with, "I don't know, son, but I think we should keep it quiet and see if we can get down and find a deer for dinner." I noticed his hands were trembling with fright, but it was a good sight to see that he wanted to keep going. So I went along with him. You see, my dad is fearless, and he is a quite strong man. From what I know, no one would want to mess with him. To see him want to continue our hunt was a good sign to me. I kept on listening closely to the sounds that surrounded us. As the forest became alive again, I heard something to our left, and up ahead I saw a deer come into the clearing. It was a buck with a genuinely nice set of antlers. He seemed not to notice us yet. I quickly but quietly got my crossbow out, because I did not want to frighten the deer. I loaded the crossbow up to a game at the heart of the big buck and fired. I saw pierce through the skin of the buck as he tried to run away with the arrow stuck into his heart. We followed the blood trail and the now injured deer as it was letting out cries of pain. I took out my hunting knife and with an act of mercy put it out of his misery. After that we heard something to the right of us. I looked down to the tree line to see if anything was there. I heard a low deep guttural growl. I instantly froze in fear, whatever it was sounded intimidating. But it was odd, as in Arkansas the largest animal we usually have, our bison or bear, whatever this thing was, did not sound like any predator that hunts in this region. My dad picked up the carcass of the dead deer and put it on his shoulders. He signaled me to follow him as we were making our way back to the cabin. And I kept hearing heavy footsteps follow us every few meters. I kept looking around to see if I could catch a glimpse of whatever it was. And then I saw it. To the left of me, I saw a huge shape moving slowly by us. It was absolutely gigantic. It looked like a grizzly bear to me. But it's odd to see anything this big in these woods. I signaled my dad to look. He turned and saw it as well. And say quietly to me, "Stay close to me. As long as we stay quiet and move quietly, we should be okay." I responded with a head nod, and we started to sneak our way back to the garden. We got to the cabin in under 15 minutes. Both my dad and I were on edge as we moved back to the cabin. All we heard was the occasional growling and how the creature, as it seemed like it was taunting us. As we moved into the clearing near the cabin, I heard a booming set of footsteps behind me. I looked behind me to see the same creature once again. Except this time I could see clearly. It looked a lot like a grizzly bear, but with horns and eyes glowing a bright crimson, blood red. My dad and I screamed as we ran back to the cabin. We made it just in time to close the door, as whatever the creature was banging on the door with brute force. My dad started panicking, putting the tear down and brushing the kids and my stepmother upstairs. I kept on hearing this creature scratch at the door, and every so often it tried to break it down. It roared so loud that my ears started ringing as it desperately tried to break down the door. I decided I was going to try to scare it off. I went upstairs to my bedroom window, opened it up, and got my Winchester ready. I got the massive beast in my sights as I fired at it. After I hit it, I let out a roar, ran back into the woods with the earth shaking behind its every step. Everything suddenly went quiet again. After this, I ran downstairs and looked outside and see nothing but large footprints in the snow. I opened the door and looked at the damage the creature caused, and I saw that there were huge scratch marks and indentations on the door. I then went to the footprints left by the creature. And to my surprise, there was no blood, even though I'm positive I shot it multiple times. After this, I researched more into our history and found out that whatever my dad and I saw that night is probably known as the Ozark Howler. Every so often, we can still hear it howl at night, but my dad and I have learned to respect the beast. So this is a true story about one of the more real life-threatening moments I have experienced. About a year ago, I drove across the country to California for grad school. Total, the trip was about 2,800 miles, taking me across the middle of the country. I had two other options: to drive the northern route through Colorado or the southern way through Alabama and South Texas. Although I was probably going the more boring way. It was the fastest by about 6 hours. The entire trip took about 4.5 days. I had recently been through a tough breakup and things back home all around were not going great for me since undergrad. So that played into my decision to move to California. I really enjoyed the drive itself and gave me plenty of time to reflect on my life and figure out the stuff I needed to change about myself. I would basically drive 10 to 15 hours a day until I got tired and then booked an Airbnb. I took my time on the drive. If I saw a cool national park or landmark to explore, I did it because it was the freest I have ever felt. Anyways, I was driving through the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I had never watched the show, but figured it would be a cool place to explore. I was making good time on the drive. So I took a 30-minute detour and followed the GPS on my phone to the center of the national park. I drove through a quaint town past the junkyard filled with old rusted vehicles, and down a stretch of road that was covered in tall spruce trees. Eventually, I lost service, but that was fine because I figured it was still a relatively frequented spot for outdoor junkies. I reached a gravel turnout marked with a wooden sign where people can take small boats to lunch. I locked my car and grabbed my knife and some water and hammock, hoping to find a cool spot by the river to get a peaceful rest. I found 2 trees with the perfect distance and set up my hammock, drifting off into a light sleep for about 30 minutes or so. When I decided it was time to go, I rolled my hammock into its case, put my large knife and water into my drawstring bag I carry them in. I should add that I carry the knife whenever I go hiking because I'm a paranoid person that has seen way too many movies. I grew up hunting and fishing and wrestled in college. So I normally feel safe on my own. And as I walked up from the riverbank, I noticed a black SUV had parked and a young couple was standing behind it with the back hatch open. The guy was setting up a fishing pole. And the girl was standing there just watching. I noticed a medium-sized black dog with medium-length hair. It looked like a lab mixed with maybe German Shepherd. My family has always had large dogs, and this one looked friendly. So the thought did not cross my mind that maybe it was not. As I got closer to their car, which was parked by mine, the dog noticed me and started trotting towards me. As I got within 5 feet, I stuck my palm out for it to sniff. I do not know if it felt like I was going to be a threat or what, but it instantly started barking and growling, running from its owners and back to me. As it did this, the girl just looked at it saying nothing. And the guy just kept messing with the fishing line. After a few times of running back and forth, the dog charged at me, and I started backpedaling and yelling at it. This team was scared off a little, but it kept charging and lunged at me, biting me through my shorts and my mid-thigh, breaking the skin. Thankfully, it did not hold or shake, but I could immediately see blood running down my leg. I honestly had no idea what to do, and I felt terrified and an intense anger towards the couple for not calling their dog off. The guy was still playing with a fishing pole, while the girl looked with an expressionless face. After the dog bit me, it continued to do its charging back and forth. As it ran back to them, I quickly opened my drawstring and fumbled with my knife. It was a large 10-inch blade in a black sheath. I drew it and yelled out to the couple that I will use it if I must. Out of all things I could have yelled to make myself seem tough, I just said, "Please get your dog." I guess it was all my mind could process at the time. Finally, the guy looked up and called his dog back and held it by the collar, allowing me to get my car. I did so as quickly as possible. No one saying a word to each other. And as I drove off, the adrenaline wore off, with what was replaced with anger. My brain was telling me that I should go back and confront the couple for being so careless about their dog viciously attacking another person. However, the logical side of my mind told me to keep driving and did not look back. I know this might not seem like that big of a deal, and could have been a lot worse. But imagine being 1,000 miles away from home in the remote Arkansas wilderness with no phone service. I assessed the damage once I found a safe place to pull off the road. And after I regained service. Luckily, the puncture wounds were not very deep, and I had a medical kit in my trunk from where I was a lifeguard. I dressed it with rubbing alcohol and cotton gauze and drove off. Looking back, I should have called the police or animal control because the dog could have had rabies. I really did not even think about that at the time. I guess I was just still so shaken up. If I ever drive through Arkansas again, I will make sure to never ever go hiking. I'm going to tell you about an experience I had as a kid that continues to terrify me to this day. I have never come to a solid opinion on what it was. So I decided to share it publicly and see if anyone else has had a similar experience. If you have one, or can point me to other similar examples, it would be greatly appreciated. So first, some context. I was between the ages of 13 and 14 years old. Roughly 30 years ago now. I lived in a very tiny rural town with less than 400 people at the north edge of the Ozark Mountains in Missouri. This town was so small, we did not have our own police and school only went to 8th grade. After that, you had to go to the next town. I lived in a modular home about the same size of a double-wide trailer. At the time, my sister and her son, who was 4 or 5 at the time, lived with us. So it was just the two of them, myself and my parents. We also had a family dog that slept inside the doorway. As for the layout, if you were to walk in front of the door, straight ahead would be the living room. To the right was a short hall. On the right of that hall was the door to my sister's room. On the left, the bathroom. I shared a room with my nephew directly at the end of the hall. In the bedroom, we slept in bunk beds, and I was on the top bunk. The bed was built by my dad, and although it was stable, and made a lot of noise and wobbled when he or I moved around in it. And unfortunately, I do not have a date season or any specific year for this. It was not in the habit that young to be recording things like that. But as I said, it was about 30 years ago now. I was somewhere around 14 or 15. And my nephew was 4 or 5. So here's what happened. I do not remember how I woke up, just that I was awake. It was in the middle of the night and everyone was in bed. And then I started hearing a strange noise. It started at the front door. It sounded like a footstep, but the cadence was not quite right. These steps were repetitive and seemed to be timed. But about 5 seconds between steps, too long for it to be a person walking. They did not seem to be trying to be quiet either. There were solid thumbs. I think after the first couple, I pulled the blanket over my head. The steps, I'll just call them, that came down the hallway, past my sister's door into my room and stopped when they were right outside of my bed. I was terrified. I tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I remember it was as if my throat was squelching the sound. And my scream was just silent. My nephew said tiredly, "Mommy," and then the bed began shaking and squeaking. I remember this happening for around 3 to 5 seconds, and then it stopped. I do not remember anything after that. I do not remember falling back to sleep or any other noises. That is simply and honestly the end of my memory that night. The next day I did tell everyone in the house about what happened. But I don't think anybody really believed me. Everybody said it was probably a dream. And they all said that did not come into our room that night. Another odd thing is our dog made no noise. He seemed to be asleep through it. And I went right past where he slept. I'm not going to declare that there is no way I was dreaming. I honestly do not believe I was, but I will accept that it is a possibility. Also, no one in the house had a history of sleepwalking. And I have never known any of them to do it. But barring a dream, what do you guys think it was, and why? My grandparents used to live in the Ozark Mountains in a tiny house in the woods. I loved it there. Being from West Texas, it was always nice to resort to a place with trees. After a year or two of living in the house, my grandparents decided to renovate it to make it look like a logged cabin. I had always felt something really unsettling about the house and warned them to be careful because renovating the house could stir up some unclean spirits. They went ahead with the renovations. Gorgeous woodwork on the house with 2 gorgeous decks looking out to the mountains, and an entirely new living area in the basement. It was gorgeous. And I was overly excited to stay there in the summer. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. I felt angry even though my grandparents were very welcoming. It was quite strange. I got an official tour and for the most part, the interior was the same. Then we went to the basement. I was overwhelmed with fear. I was hesitant to go down alone at any time, honestly, no matter if it was day or night. And when I would, I could never stay for long. I always slept upstairs, and I never really felt safe down there. I don't know why. One day I was making my way down the stairs to get some laundry, which was located across from the basement. I'd only taken about 3 steps down when I suddenly felt cold and could not move. I was suddenly petrified. Not long before I felt the force of my back, and the next thing I knew I was sliding down the stairs. Still entirely petrified that I could not even scream. It was a silent fall. When I could move again, I rushed for my clothes and ran back up the stairs, and did not go back down for quite a few days. A week or so would go by. It was July 3rd. It was storming all day, was still warm outside. My grandparents had left for a party down the street, and I decided to stay and hold before it's all alone by myself. I was upstairs in their big open loft on the computer, just killing some time. It was still storming outside. And it was the last moment of daylight. I was listening to music with my headphones on, browsing YouTube and the likes. And I felt a familiar cold breeze. But instead of my entire body, it was just my neck. And instead of being an extended cold, it was brief, as if someone was blowing it on me. And I was not moving at all. I was too scared to even breathe. And as I stayed still, the headphones on my head flew at such a force to hit the computer screen in front of me. I screamed. I ran, I panicked. I tried to turn on the TV, but it was a startling loud static. I tried turning it off, and it just wouldn't. Trying to calm my nerves, I looked at a painting of a meadow my grandparents had hanging by the TV, and I saw a man with the most sinister evil face I'd ever seen, with empty white eyes that I still felt so much for you, you're staring into them. I ran outside in the rain, shoeless and terrified. I walked to the house where my grandparents were, never explaining what happened. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was the spring of 1998. When I was 14 years old. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in an exceedingly small town in Tennessee, and the boys of my troop were people I had known my entire life. And we were all awfully close, and knew each other very well, and trusted each other with our lives. We had been hiking for 5 days or so. And honestly, it was quite miserable. It rained almost every single day. And we were all exhausted and incredibly sore and very hungry, and not to mention, covered with blisters. The adults realized we had bitten off more than we could chew, and trying to hike a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather. And we had changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a driving campground that kind of plays with hookups for RVs and picnic tables and fire pits and grills, and a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area, far from any town or any houses. There may have been a few other small groups there. But if there were, we never interacted or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet, and thus overly excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark, and we had all finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including my friend Jeremy, who, like everyone else in our group, I had known since we were just babies, headed up to the bathhouse, which was maybe a quarter mile away. We had to walk through the pitch-dark woods up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and after 10 or 15 minutes followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old iridescent kind. This was before LEDs were very common. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light take from it off in the distance to the woods. I heard a noise to my left, and I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old-school manual water pump, about 20 feet off the trail, the kind of pump where you raise and lower a handle to pump water up from a well. There was a strange light around him, like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there by himself in the woods off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with a shower. He seemed kind of sad. And he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said, "Okay." I did not think much of it until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there. And I heard Jeremy talking from the shower. All the blood drained out of my head, and all the hair in the back of my neck stood up, and I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This was long before any of us had experimented with any kind of mind-altering substances, mind you, but I could tell they all believed me. Like I said, we had known each other forever and knew, and one of us was exaggerating, we're playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot, and then walked back together in total silence. When we got to the lever, however, I had not seen anybody there, as like he was gone without a trace. The water pump was there though. No one noticed it though before because it was way off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed. Pretty freaked out, honestly. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then, I have never been able to figure out what happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend, which is unlikely? Did I hallucinate it? Also unlikely, but ultimately, who is to say? I live in the Ozark Mountains. And for the past 2 years, I have often had to drive to the Ozark National Forest for about 2 hours back and forth. It's a long stretch with no towns, no lights, just hills and trees as far as you can see. Nothing weird has ever happened to me on that drive. Well, like a month ago, I am driving the normal drive. It is sunny, but hazy. And I feel something invade my thoughts. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. I got this buzzy feeling in my body. Like something was trying to yank me out of it. It just felt weird. I was not high and I do not drink. I started feeling like something was talking to me. And it felt like it was coming from the hills, or it was from the hills itself. It was basically conveying to me without words that it wasn't male or female. And it was really old and needed energy to devote it to it. But had to be mutually given. None of it was in words. It was just like I suddenly knew this. I pulled over as I came out of the mountains because I felt so weird. I chalked it up to just being tired. But every time I have had to drive through there in the past few weeks, I feel whatever it is pulling at me. The weirdest part happened last night and caused me to reach out. Please do not think I am weird. But I really don't have words for this. I dreamed I was having sex with nature. Like these vines were forming into things that I was just getting intimate with. It was a very strange dream. And the weird thing is I knew I was dreaming the entire time, and I felt it kind of laughing at me, and the entire time. I never actually saw it though. It was incredibly happy. The stream was just so weird. And honestly, I was not scared, but more amazed. Let me repeat this. I was not high or drunk. I have no history of seizures, hallucinations, or any serious mental illness. I am tempted to chalk it up to my imagination. But it came out of nowhere, and with no reference. What could I be experiencing? Should I just pull over one day and get out and see what happens?